Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. This is your genetically perfect host, Scott Weatherly. And as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm just grateful you haven't found out my name isn't Julian Darius. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm good. I'm glad to be a valid. I think that's. Are you acknowledging that you're?
I'm invalid. And you will quickly find all of my. I'm
Yeah.
definitely a degenerate, and
Yeah.
all of my critical views are absolutely invalid and proud of it.
Yeah, we make all these. I love when we do this. We make all these puns and just guess. Nobody knows what film we're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about Gattaca today. 1997's Gattaca. This is like 1997, mixed year, I think. Just to sort of, we obviously talked about Event Horizon, which is the same year. This is also the year of Batman and Robin. So, you know, wasn't a great year. But then we've got Gattaca, and this film was a financial flop.
Yeah.
12.2 million against a 36 million budget.
Yeah, I mean, it gets referenced often enough, and I had not seen it until I watched it for the show. So it is sort of beloved.
Yeah, I one of the things I was curious about, because I watched it on DVD, I didn't see it in cinema. Is that sort of, like you say, it's got a cult reference, but also apparently this film is a favorite of geneticists. Like, this really did strike home. It's one of those films where a scientific community takes to heart and is like, yeah, no, this is pretty accurate for what could or would happen. So it's an interesting one, really. But before we get into the plot, what are your first sort of initial thoughts and overall thoughts about Gattaca?
Well, I enjoyed it. It definitely is a well-made film. It reminds me very much of sort of 1970s well-crafted film that tends to be around a certain issue. I'm thinking of, Dog Day Afternoon and Justice for All and stuff like that. Even before that, sort of like 12 Angry Men, where there's a theme. It's clearly all on that theme. It's a very carefully crafted, carefully shot. Not a lot that you can ding it for on those measures. I did find myself, sort of underwhelmed in a strange way, and not sure that I am as sold as the movie wants me to be about how this is a terrible dystopia, and see, you can really sort of like be a Mary Sue and overcome your handicap, or in this ableist society. What about you?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. It's about the underwhelmed. It's not a film of bombast. Like, this film follows a murder investigation, and at no point is there sort of like a moment of major thriller, like confrontation between killer and police with that. Like, it's all very subdued. It's very sort of, it's a small film, which is one of the things I do enjoy. But it never gets the. I really enjoy this film, but it never gets the pulse racing. Do you know what I mean? It's not one I'm like, I'm itching for these to see what happens next. It feels in many ways, as we're sort of going through the Twilight Zone, it feels very much in line with those sorts of things. Of, like you said, about there's an idea and we're going to expand it, and this feels like an expanded version of that, and I enjoy that. But yeah, it's not like it's not a film I'd go to and be like, right, yeah, I've got to watch that again. You know, it's not going to be heavy on rotation, but I definitely enjoy it, and I love some of the even the aesthetics, like the way this looks, and you know, just some of the sets and sort of the decisions they made. It feels like out of time, you know, and it's no moment in the film sort of captures that more for me than the very end of the film. And we'll get to the plot in a second, but like at the moment, at the end of the film, you see people getting onto a spaceship to go on a year-long deep space mission, and they're all wearing suits.
Yes.
And so that felt very sort of like 60s and 50s sort of like sci-fi to me.
Yeah, sort of gray in the man in the gray flannel suit.
Mm.
Yeah, no, and it has a certain style to it like that. I like that it's quiet, like you said. I like that the murder investigation isn't bombastic. I mean, there is no, if we're talking about genes, there is no genes of like Minority Report, where
Mhm.
all of the stuff that's interesting in Minority Report is the stuff that's more quiet. And you know,
Yeah.
you kind of want to tone down the action scenes and have more of a Gattaca feel to it. This has none of that, and I like that. I just don't know that its thesis is really as clear as it thinks it is.
Okay. I think I know
We
what
can
you're
get into
saying.
that.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into that. But first and foremost, let's give a plot for those that have or haven't seen the film. So stick with me because this one went a little long, but not too long. But anyway, in the not too distant future, genetic manipulation has been perfected. Genetic disease, bad personality traits, and other imperfections can be removed at conception, the child becoming the best possible version of itself. If you can afford it, it's the best way for a child to be conceived. Society has adapted to this change, and being a child of genetic manipulation puts you ahead in the game in almost every way. You are regarded as a valid. However, there are those that are still born without genetic manipulation, destined to be the lowest run on the social ladder. One such person is Vincent Freeman, Ethan Hawke, a boy that grows up with a valid brother, Anton, Loren Dean. Based on his genetic makeup, it's estimated that Vincent won't live past the age of 32, but this doesn't stop him. He studies hard, determined that one day he will be part of a space program. Also, Vincent repeatedly challenges his brother to a game of chicken by seeing who can swim out out to sea the furthest before turning back. Time after time, Anton wins, but finally Vincent beats his brother and decides it's time to leave home. Not being a valid, Vincent struggles to get a job doing what he wants, or even getting his foot in the door. Eventually, he gets a job as a janitor working for Gattaca Aerospace Corporation. He watches the ships going up several times a day, knowing he can never be on one of them, until he is introduced to Jerome Morrow, Jude Law, a valid paralyzed in an accident and willing to sell his identity to maintain his lifestyle. Vincent changes his appearance and, using skin, hair, urine, and blood samples for full security, is able to start impersonating Jerome, getting a job on a space mission within Gattaca that will take him on a deep space mission. Yeah, we'll take him on a deep space mission. Over time, Vincent demonstrates how competent he is at the job, but he knows that this would all be for nothing if his true identity is discovered. This comes under threat when the mission director is murdered. The police investigation starts, supported by Gattaca employee Irene Cassini, Uma Thurman, and the office is swept for all the material with a genetic trace, including an eyelash left by Vincent. The lash reveals that Vincent was in the building and becomes the number one suspect. To keep close to the investigation, Vincent starts spending time with Irene, which develops into a romance. Meanwhile, Detective Hugo, Alan Arkin, is having Gattaca staff scanned again and again, looking for any sign of one of them being Vincent. Over and over, Vincent, using material from Jerome, is able to fool the scans. Unfortunately, he is not able to maintain the facade in front of Irene, and Vincent confesses his past, leaving Irene with a difficult decision. Also, Anton Freeman has also become a police detective and is determined to prove that Vincent is there, but does not believe he is the murderer. As he starts to piece things together, he forces Irene to take him to Jerome's home, expecting to find Vincent, but only finds Jerome. Before he can press the suspects further, Anton is called away when the mission lead is found to be the murderer. While the crime is solved, Vincent still confronts Anton, knowing that he can ruin everything he has worked for. The frustration and resentment between the two takes them back to the beach in a final game of chicken. Still convinced there is nothing left to lose, Vincent pushes himself further than he has ever done before, leaving Anton to drown. Vincent eventually turns back and saves his brother, leaving him unconscious on the beach. Going home, Jerome talks Vincent into taking it all as far as they had agreed to go. Vincent getting on that spaceship. Jerome has been storing samples of genetic material that will cover Vincent for years to come. And Vincent goes back to Gattaca to board the ship and start his deep space mission as Jerome climbs into an incinerator to end his life as credits roll. So that's quite a long-winded plot, but I think that sort of covers it. It is a small film, and like it's one of those reasons, but not a lot sort of happens, but there is a lot in there. And I think let's start with your point there, the thesis of this film. What do you feel is the thesis of this film?
I think it's an anti-ableist film, right? Essentially, you have a futuristic society in which people's opportunities are determined by their genetic predispositions, and the ability to test this rapidly and easily. You see so many scenes like the Alan Arkin character testing like every single thing in a restaurant, and people have these portable testers. So this is just, a step beyond where we are today, but very believable. So you have this sci-fi version of an anti-ableist argument, and then you have the Jude Law character who literally has lost the use of his legs to represent the sort of like present day, ableist, situation, without the sci-fi contentions. And so I think the thesis is essentially people shouldn't be pigeonholed. People can achieve great things despite being differently abled, being handicapped. And this is then elaborated through these two characters and to a lesser degree, Uma Thurman. And I think that the film wants to argue the pro differently abled position that, is a terrible world in which Jude Law puts himself in an incinerator, which I don't buy, but that's a separate issue. And it's a terrible world that has this kind of deterministic point of view. And so we're going to take that present day critique and elaborate it through this sci-fi construct, and have the person who really can't use their legs as the identification figure for the present day issue to kind of connect the two. Okay, with that having been said, my criticism is, first of all, from the perspective of the argument, it's a problem that the Ethan Hawke character has to be such a Mary Sue, so fantastic, just excel at everything and be willing to put himself through all of this. That's the equivalent of like the black characters in movies that are, about how horrible racism is, that you say like, okay, you are the best butler in history. You have excelled despite all of this discrimination. You shouldn't have to go through all of that. What about the people who can't stomach that or can't excel to that degree? They never had a chance. You shouldn't have to scrape your body every day to achieve in this society. So there is that issue from that point of view. But then from the other point of view, is it so bad that, we have these genetic tests? We're not, even today, nobody's going into space if their heart is beating, 150 times a minute after 30 minutes on the treadmill, as Ethan Hawke is. That's probably not wise. So, and he is, deceiving people. I mean, so I sort of think that it has problems on both ends.
Yeah, that's what you're saying, especially sort of the Ethan Hawke end. It is quite funny that he's manipulating and deceiving in order to be able to get into space. And the fact of the matter is, if the G forces do hit him and he goes off, like it legitimately might, impact his heart. The ableist thing, I think, like you say, with the Jerome character, or Eugene, Jerome Eugene, as it usually comes, the Jude Law character. It's interesting because he does represent one of the things they sort of swing. There's this thing of sort of they swing a little bit with that character because they almost want to show a resentment for his situation. They want him to be like, yes, I'm trapped in this wheelchair and I'm angry at the world, and they want to sort of have that, with his drinking and stuff. Yet later in the film, they're going to have him drop a line that it was no accident that made him step in front of that car.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get no follow-up on that says, well, you had all this stuff, let's really explore that, because all he talks about is he won a silver medal, and so he was supposed to be the best, but he turned out to be second best. And so it's almost like, so that drove you to an almost suicide attempt. You just come across like you lose that sympathy. Like, I want to have this thing of like, did others turn against him, or was it just internal? Like, was it this existential thing? Was he built up to, this? Can you explore things like this idea of like anybody can be president, and then have all that fed to you, and then when you can't do that, like people walking away from you and the loneliness, like there's got to be more to it. It just feels a bit frivolous to have that as an excuse. So there are things like with that character that I'm like, weirdly, like he's really important to the plot, but feels like one of the least fleshed out characters in the entire film.
That's true. I mean, he has a certain coldness to him. I think a lot of characters do. Almost in that sort of like Blade Runner sense. I think with him, he feels very sort of fascistic. He feels very sort of like a member of the sort of like Nazi judged Aryan race, right?
Yeah.
And he thinks, I am entitled to this. He comes off as very entitled. But by the end, obviously very sympathetic to Ethan Hawke's character. And I think the film, I do sort of feel like we're in that kind of like Minority Report range where we're like, how does this system work? It seems very fallible. So, I mean, you're right that like it does seem very realistic, the technology involved and everything. But I find myself thinking like the film wants you to note that one of the things that you're judged on based on your genetic code is predisposition to violence, right? And Vincent is judged. That's one of the things they read off to him. Yet, obviously, the Jude Law character has attempted suicide by throwing himself in front of a car and ultimately commits suicide by putting himself in an incinerator. The Gore Vidal character, who, and I love these performances, by the way, who is the lead of the mission, is a murderer. So, obviously we're supposed to think that this system is not working very well. And if there is a sort of like bell curve that these characters are falling on, still, nonetheless, people can fall on either side of that, and they're being judged prematurely. Yeah, okay, fine, but
I get what you're saying. I think there's something more there, because one of the other things that I took from this film is you say about it being fascistic, and it is. It's clearly supposed to be that. Like it falls into the sort of like retro-futuristic idea of fascism. Sort of. They're all very sort of like if this film had come out 10 years later, I think it would be what's his name? Batman, Christian Bale. Would have been in this film. Like that Patrick Bateman kind of character. It's that kind of thing. It's sort of like we did it with Equilibrium, which is another film I kind of like guilty pleasure film. But one of the things I took from this film is there's an interesting thing. It's never really acknowledged, but it's sort of there. Is that because they've all had these genetic traits, either purified or removed? The personality thing bothers me a little bit, I have to admit, where they're like, we can remove all these addictive things and all this, and this, potential for violence and all this. Like, everyone's still going to have a breaking point. But one of the interesting things is when you see, especially it's more prevalent with the males, they're all designed to look the same.
Mm.
So when you sort of see Loren Dean, who plays the brother Anton, and then you put him next to Ethan Hawke after he's been modelled up, and Jude Law, and all these other men as they're walking into Gattaca,
Mm-hmm.
they're all very same. You know, this is this thing, and I think there's this idea of becoming not so much almost a clone. You know, you are by taking out all these flaws, you just become a homogenous mass of people. This idea of perfection becomes almost irrelevant because you have so many people elevated to that. It's the same as, and it's a weird, it's just come to a weird comparison. The Incredibles, like Syndrome's point is when everyone has superpowers, no one has superpowers because it's the norm. And all these people become like the norm, you know, this sort of super layer, and they become this homogenous. And it's almost like, well, when you see all the people that aren't the natural borns, you know, Ethan Hawke, when he's shown as younger, he's got spiky hair, he's got his glasses. You have Ernest Borgnine. You know, you have these other actors with very distinctive faces that are very different from everybody else. There's this clear thing of like, I don't know, there's this note of being perfectionized is actually really boring. You know, you are just a part of a mass because there seems like little fun to be had up at this level as well.
Well, that is very true. No, I mean, I think that look. I mean, first of all, Jude Law, who you know is one of my favorite actors. He looked the part. I mean, he always has that sort of like. There's a reason why he was cast as the sex robot in AI, right? I mean, he needs like they just need to spray him with like the thinnest veneer of plastic gloss for him to look like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I'd make a gigolo robot look like. So he has that kind of like Nazi perfection to him. But yeah, I mean, and I think that some of it is that kind of like Aryan thing, the bullshit theory of the Nazis, stupid beyond belief for the record. But also some of it is, I just lost it. Some of it is the sort of like man in the gray flannel suit, right? I mean, this idea of sort of the limited scope, not just of male attractiveness, but also sort of male dress and presentation and all of that. And you're right that especially like in that restaurant scene, you think nobody is having fun, right? I mean, you sometimes sort of see this in sort of depictions of fascist societies where you think, yeah, you're rich, you have some power, but you know, you can't speak out or be flamboyant or be different in any way, or people sort of look at you askance like.
But that's it. That's exactly the point. Is this thing of like this homogenization? There is no variance. You know, there is only this vague notion of perfection in these characters, and I kind of like that. It's almost like a glass ceiling that Ethan Hawke's got to break through. He's got to become a part of. And it's almost, to me, I take it as because he obviously becomes Jerome. You know, he has to become to this persona. Is the sacrifice of self to achieve his dreams? Like, you know, he has this very specific dream, and he achieves it. You know, at the end of the film is him getting onto that mission, and we'll get to. There's a couple of points I really like about the end of the film, but he has to sacrifice this idea of self. And even when he's being introduced to Jerome, I can't remember the actor, but when there's this sort of like, you know, broker kind of character that sort of introduces him, and I love the actor. He plays Monk, and it's going to bother me now. I can't remember, but when he's introduced him, he says like, "Look, I'm not here for half measures. Like, you are going to go 100% in, or you're not at all," sort of thing. Like, you know, it's this idea of like Vincent Freeman, you know, doesn't exist anymore. Like, you are now Jerome Morrow, and so it's that for me, I take it as that, you know, when I'm watching the Ethan Hawke's or Vincent story, this idea of sacrificing who he is to achieve his dream is quite. I kind of like. I love that element actually. I like it. The fact he's like, yeah, I've got to achieve, and I've got to deceive in order to join this club to be able to get through to do what I want to do. And I'm sure we've all felt that, like, you know. But in doing so, it's like, other than achieving his dream, there is nothing else that benefits him really from doing this. Like, it gives him access to a club or something, but that's about it.
You and I both have, I mean, I've talked about how we play tennis and how, not often, but when we do, we both like give it 100% and just run for everything. And, I mean, we're both that kind of personality. But, I find myself wondering, whether I'm quibbling, and I know this is a good movie. I think it's, at least a 7. It's a solid movie. It's a good movie. I find myself sort of playing devil's advocate and quibbling on the edges. I mean, this whole thing that you're describing of sort of like fitting into this fascistic society. Why is that grafted onto? I find that very interesting. Why is that grafted onto this whole like genetic ableist, or anti-ableist sort of argument? I think, again, you have to believe that this society would look at these bell curves of probability and say, yeah, you have a 10% chance of a heart arrhythmia. Okay, most people develop some sort of arrhythmia at some point to one degree or another. I mean, this is not shocking. I find, and the other thing I find interesting is where we come to this movie, who we identify with, and what side of the argument we identify with, because you and I are both sort of, high achieving, motivated, sort of work hard, to a fault kind of people. At the same time, I identify with, having manic depression, having, sort of gross, good fine motor skills, but bad gross motor skills. I had a lot of disabilities that were like, they said that they couldn't evaluate because I was, in contrast, this sounds so ridiculous, but so highly intelligent that they said that as a child I had already compensated for these, and you can't even test these until a certain age. So, like, on the one hand, I was genetically superior. On the other hand, had all of these genetic defects. But it seems to me most people are nobody is really perfect at these things. And we understand they're just probabilities anyway, but it's treated in a way that I'm not sure it ever would be. Does that make sense?
Yes, I see. I understand what you're saying. However, I would throw in that there's a drop line in this near the beginning when he's going for one of the jobs, and so they discount him and they said the insurance wouldn't even cover him. So there's this thing of like, someone has found a way of making money from this. And this is why one of the things like I was watching this and thinking like, I would love this to be, and we often say this, and it's, because I think you and I love the detail and the minutiae of things, like if this was a 10-episode show and you could explore the wider things of the world, like how did they get here? How did this society come to this place? I can imagine that you get this class of genetic people, these sort of like Captain Americas of everything. And like
we're all going to look like Chris Evans.
Oh, I'm not that lucky. I've seen the pictures, Jesus. But like, they get to that point where, they've got strong hearts. They've got, they've got an exceptional lifespan. They've got no, bad addictive traits. Saying that, Jude Law's character does smoke, and all these other things. Like you've got that layer where the insurance company's going like, yeah, you are such a low risk that we can no longer insure you. Like there's no point insuring you for life insurance. Like, so we've got to make money elsewhere. Oh, look at these invalids. So now if you want to do something, you've got to pay this massive premium. And so I can imagine that actually this society wasn't driven by genetic perfection, but more like by commerce and economy and capitalism, where if you're being told, and this is the other thing, like they say, like there's a thing in there they say about his lifespan is 30. He's expected to live no further than 32, which is ridiculous because he has like a 25% chance of getting heart disease and stuff. But that's what the doctors say. And so they're like, well, why would they bother training you to do anything? You're not worth the investment. But these other guys that are going to live well into the, past 100 and be super healthy, they are worth the investment. And so it comes back to money again, where I can see companies, let's think about the big companies going, yeah, we can really train these people and they can be a real investment and and then those people that have got that, they'll be the ones that run in Wall Street. They're the ones running these other things. So I think it's less about, I know the film's trying to tell this, but I'm sort of looking at how this would have come about. I can totally see this society being driven by commerce. And you see the two brothers, like, and Anton, the brother, becomes this, there's a great line in this. I can't remember Uma Thurman or one of them, the mission inspector says they talk about the people that are going to go into space. And they've got this thing of the quality of people that are going to go up in the gym. And they say, oh, yeah, we've got people that are the best. It's but there's even other people that, they haven't got the best traits and we won't go up, but they're probably good enough to become, I don't know, a policeman. So even within the genetically modified, there's a class structure. Yeah, there's they're not all the elite. Yeah. There's a ladder within that as well. And so I kind of like that there's little bits of this. You get little lines every now and then that you go, oh, okay, there's a definite class structure. And Vincent was at the bottom. And even Anton wasn't at the top. There's this other,
I like that too. But, and there it is true that, like when you begin to select for personality trait or trait X, you do get, other traits get brought in, including physical traits. This is a phenomenon in genetics, when that has to do with breeding and things like this. But I'm not convinced that what you're describing would lead to everyone having that same sort of look. And I'm not convinced that I like what you're saying. I live in one of the most, laissez-faire capitalist countries around. And we still have prohibited discrimination in insurance already without this dystopian future. But even imagining what you're describing, okay, I can imagine somebody who is only going to live to 30. As you say, I'm not convinced that those traits would lead to that diagnosis. But, imagining that case, yes, that person might pay higher premiums, and this would be a great illustration of like the high cost of poverty, right? Like if you're too poor to genetically modify your kid is going to have to pay these premiums for the rest of his life, and that could be a good social criticism. But again, we're talking about like, okay, you have a, 25% chance of heart disease. You know how many Americans have heart disease? You know how many Brits have heart disease? Even if we priced all of this stuff in, behaviors such as, you pointed out, Jude Law smoking and drinking, that is going to make, or participating in a dangerous sport where you can be seriously damaged, driving fast. There are those things are going to have a bigger influence than, these, whether you have a 30% chance of heart disease or a 60% chance. That sounds like an incredible difference. But, whether you eat Big Macs or you eat vegetables is going to make that much of a difference too.
Yeah, I agree. And I will admit that this film doesn't want you to think about that. This film doesn't want you to think about, you might have a predisposition to cancer or you may not have a predisposition to cancer, but if you smoke from the age of 16 to 60, you regardless of your predisposition, you are increasing your chances of getting some form of cancer. Fine, yeah. This film doesn't really want you to think about that. It wants to focus in on those genetics as a thing. Like you're right, because it's that nature versus nurture in a weird way, isn't it? Like, what are your natural predispositions? We have built a filter, a genetic filter that takes out all your negative natural predispositions. We can get rid of all that, but that doesn't prevent, as you say, nurture stuff, things that will happen in life that will lead you to an incident or some illness or whatever. So there are definitely factors, and this film doesn't want to think about that. It doesn't want you to think about that. Like I say, it wants to focus in on the genetics of it and what that could lead to. But also, this film doesn't address medicine in a wider scope. Like what impact has this had on healthcare and those sorts of things? Like, it's not a wider story. It's only very focused on this small scenario.
I mean, I'm not sure that the film doesn't want you to think about those things, but I think the film leverages those things, whether it's Jude Law, drinking, smoking, having, a suicide attempt, and then a final suicide. I mean, I think that the film wants to leverage these things to say discriminating based on, genetic predispositions is not fair, and ableism in general is not fair. Okay, fine. Point taken. You're right. I get it. But it doesn't really it does not really create a convincing society. Rather the society is just one in which, I mean, it's you're right to point out the Twilight Zone, right? I mean, and one of the key science fiction types of stories, right, is like, if this goes on, right? You take this idea and just extrapolate it further, and we don't really focus on, we kind of keep everything about the same around that trait of society. We don't really think, well, yeah, I mean, this would not go that extreme anyway. So, I mean, it starts to fall apart if you... That doesn't mean it's not a good movie. I mean, it does what it's doing really well.
And I think that's the thing, like you say, it's world... I will admit, this film's world building isn't strong, and I don't think that's a part it's looking to do, because it has a very specific locale. Like, you are literally, there's like 4 sets. It's trying to keep them very sort of small, very very sort of fixed.
It kind of feels like a play in some ways.
Yes, it does, very much so. Yeah, but there are those questions, and again, one of the things that you and I sort of come back to often is, that's fine for this, but how is this working somewhere else? Like, this might working, say, if this is California, like, how's this working in like rural Illinois? How is this working in London? How is this working in other parts of the world? Like, does this have the same impact? Does this same thing available? How has this impacted politics or policing? Or, like, you get to, and it's that thing we've said with when we watched Westworld. That's season 3 of Westworld. Again, there's that question around the use of the AI and all this other stuff. And you sort of go, okay, well, how does this work? Is it good or bad? You can't, you shouldn't just take a side. You need to sort of lay out your full case. And this film is very much going down that thing of, here's a small case. It's almost like, here's a case study, in fact. Here's a single example of how this thing can play out.
I guess what I object to is, I mean, and again, I love these performances. I love seeing Gore Vidal. I love seeing, Jude Law. I mean, these are, I'm engrossed in the movie from start to finish. I never am bored and thinking, oh God, how much longer do I have to go? But yeah, I mean, I think that this movie does take a side, right? This is wrong, and this is emblematic of ableism in general. Look, China's going to be there in a small amount of time. China is continuing with genetic experimentation, and this is going to happen, right? Okay, all right. So what does that look like? Is it really going to look like this? I mean, you can push the argument, but I mean, is it wrong for parents to genetically select? I mean, like today, even in the West, right, in present day, if you test the embryo for the possibility of Down syndrome.
I was just thinking this. Yeah.
That potential child is almost universally aborted. Or prevented from coming to term in one way or another. It may happen early enough that it's not, doesn't constitute abortion, it's just failure. All right, and there are people who object to that. I mean, and that's a real argument. I'm not mocking it. I mean, that is an ethical argument. You're bringing fewer people with Down syndrome into the world. On the other hand, others will say, look, I mean, if you can not suffer from asthma and guarantee your kids don't have asthma, that sounds like a positive thing. And there are a lot of genetic predispositions. I mean, it's terrible to die of a heart attack at 30. If you could select children who are less likely to do that, is that not a positive?
It is, and I think it's about it's about the extent of the menu, isn't it? This is where it starts to sort of like, it's about, and it's always about these things, like how far will it go? Like if you could have the opportunity to say, yeah, I can guarantee that my child will not have a genetic illness that will, cause them to have a disability, whether it be even as low as asthma or hay fever, they're not going to have one of these things. Or a weak heart, or we can do something about those things. It's a difficult argument, because there is this thing of saying, what if I could prevent my child from having Down syndrome? Is it the right thing to do? Well, yeah. How does it affect their quality of life? If I can guarantee them a good life, and it's this ableist argument, then, isn't it? And I struggle with this, as I think many people do. Is, yes, if I was to have a disabled child with whatever condition, I would care and love and raise that child in the best way possible. If, however, at the very point of conception, someone had said, I can guarantee that they will be 100% healthy with no conditions, all we've got to do is make these genetic manipulations and stuff, would you do it? I don't know. It's
Well, the answer is yes, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, of course you would, because you love your potential child and want them to be healthy, right?
But there's
I mean,
other
that's part
people.
of
But
love.
there's other people, and again, because one of the things this film doesn't cover, and I think it's because it's a science fiction film, is this idea of the influence of religion or spirituality. And there will be people there will definitely be people that will say, no, I would not interfere, because it's the child that, whether it be like that God's given me, or it's their own body, or it's destiny, or it's fate, or whatever, that will say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Well, but the reality is nobody's offering a guarantee of anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're all talking. I mean, this is what kind of drives me crazy the more I think about this movie, is that this is like quantum physics. It's all probability. Nothing is certain here, and there are conditions where you would say, okay, everybody's got their own spectrum. Everybody's got how much they value different things. There are conditions under which, virtually anyone would say, I mean, for example, your child, your child is probably going to die within the first 6 months of life. All right, let's make those modifications, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's got a threshold there. Is Down syndrome enough? It is for most people. It's not for Sarah Palin, for example, and I'm not judging. On the other hand, manic depression. Where does this end? And so that's the science fiction conceit. But I mean, ultimately, it's a spectrum anyway. And I mean, this is something that's being talked about in the autistic community of neurodiversity. There are advantages to, autistic people have advantages as well as disadvantages, but it's not purely a handicap. This is something that society doesn't have enough roles for at present and understand as much, but it's wrong to look at that as like, oh, well, you cannot do this thing that others can do, and it's simply a loss of, say, cognitive function or whatever. Okay, so but that, maybe weeded out in, tests similar to Down syndrome. Um, at some future point, right? So, I mean, there are real arguments here. I
Mm.
don't mean to discount them, but they're all probabilities. You will still have kids born with everything imaginable, and even a child who is elite can develop these things. And so and the film does show that. So
Hmm.
knowing that, setting up a society that looks at Jude Law, who's clearly out drunk and smoking, and is in his pee. He's got to find his sober days to even get good urine. Trust me, I know the feeling. Is just seems taking it a little. It's a little absurd.
It is, but there's this thing of like what was it? Because I agree, but they're also using his drinking and smoking as a sort of it's a post. I think it's supposed to take it's a post accident behavior. Like he has lost his his purpose, his raison d'etre. Like he was a swimmer, like he'd do all this stuff, and he was supposed to be this great athlete and all this other stuff, and that's been taken from him. And so it's almost like it's movie shorthand, isn't it, to be like, well, now he's a drunk and now he drinks and he smokes, and it's like this ideal of perfection has been brought down by these horrible habits. It's meant to be it's that. So again, there's this argument of saying like, yeah, I get what you're saying, like he is a representative, like you can go that way, but is it not the accident or the incident that's driven him to it? It's not driven him, but that became a post-accident behavior, and it's almost like he's almost rebelling against his own perfectionism, isn't he? Like he's challenging it almost. So like, I'm going to drink and I'm going to smoke and I'm going to be a knobhead and stuff like that. Like, what does it mean? So I don't know. Like, yeah, but you're right. That but you said about it being percentages, but still reducing those percentages. Like I don't know the figures. I couldn't tell you the statistics, but it's obviously like one in however many will have some genetic disorder. And the other thing as well, there'll be really really rare ones. Like some bone degenerative disease, or like you said, some neurological impairment or something that's so insanely rare that even with everything else removed, they could still have this. If anything, it might even make it more prevalent because it's like, well, we've removed everything else, and this one thing has now become, the one factor in your genetic makeup that we didn't account for, and so you get that. So there are those possibilities of things being missed, but it still reduces the possibility. But that's what insurance is about. Going back to this idea of the insurance company, insurance is risk management, it's risk mitigation, it's all about potential, it's all about probability. If someone was to say to you, and the health system in our two countries are very different, although ours has a leaning towards certain things. But if you were to say that if an insurance company, let's take driving for example. When you take on a new driver, when I first passed my test, and I was advised to get a low engine size car that doesn't go very fast because your insurance will be lower. Because the potential is the risk, the probability is you are going to crash that car. I did, so they were right. Not massively, but I still did it. But the fact of the matter is, like, as a first-time driver, there's this thing of like, you don't have the life experience. You've got a level of naivety. You've got a level of enthusiasm. All that is calculated to go. There's a probability. There's an increased probability that this kid's going to put this wrap it around a tree, and then obviously they take the vehicle into consideration. I had a Rover Metro. It was like 1 litre, like 3 people sat in it. It struggled to go anywhere. Right, that's fine. They're like, oh, that's fine. You can't go over 50 miles an hour. But if I was to have a Porsche 911, 4 litre thing, like they'd be like, no. Your potential has gone up. We're not insuring that. There's just no chance.
Mhm.
It's the same thing. So what they do like, within this film, I can see they're looking at this file, this genetic file that is made of everyone, and they're saying your likelihood for this, heart disease or cancer or addiction, to have addictive personality or whatever, makes you either a high premium or uninsurable. So, it's
Yeah.
this thing again about but if you're a genetic, a valid, all that's brought down. So it's
Well,
not 100%, but it's definitely reducing and manipulating those probabilities.
but I mean, if you're insuring somebody with a car, their history of accidents or not is far more relevant than any other data, right?
Yes.
And my source for this is like NPR and reliable sources. One of the biggest signifiers is whether somebody is male and young,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
from
Yeah.
like 18 to 30, the average man is going to pay like twice the premiums of the average woman.
Mhm.
Which, incidentally, not to sound like regressive, nobody talks about that, right? Being like genetic discrimination or
just want
gender
to say
discrimination.
they did in this country, and it backfired.
Mm.
Because they were like, hang on, all these premiums aren't equal and it's really unfair. And so they changed it. And insurance companies, instead of meeting them in the middle, went, you're right, they're not the same.
Pays
We'll put
everyone.
everybody else's up.
Well, that's the same thing every time companies have to adjust prices. It's like,
Yeah.
you bring them up and let inflation catch up or whatever, that's easier. Yeah, okay, granted, but my point is like, that it's so we currently live under this situation, right? I mean, and there are good reasons for this. You and I were once young men, and I did some stupid things.
Oh yeah, I did
So,
very stupid thing. Yeah.
right. I know we both have talked about them. So they didn't involve terrible car crashes, thank God, or whatever. But all right. But what I'm saying is nobody looks at that and says, I'm hiring a driver for an Uber driver. We're going to prohibit any man from being an Uber driver. I run a chauffeur service. Yeah, if you have a Y chromosome, you're out. You need not apply. That has not happened.
No, and I get what you're saying, and that is the extreme. However, I'm pretty sure if there are companies, if they were allowed to, like, it's obviously the discrimination laws and everything else. If there was a company, especially let's say a smaller company, well, any size company, and 3 interview candidates turned up, and they were all of equal, around about competency, but one of them's in a wheelchair, and you know what? We haven't installed wheelchair access in the building because we've never had to, so we're going to have to now. That's an additional cost. I can guarantee you there will be a conversation that says, do we really have to hire that person? And it'll go both ways. In the modern society, it'll be like, actually, it's worth doing because we should be doing the right thing, and I'm sure more companies are like that now than they were. But there's still a thing
probably
would be
should
like,
have to do that anyway, and in a lot of municipalities and states, you would have
you
to
have
have
to
that anyway.
Exactly. But if they could, or I'm trying to think. I saw something recently. It was like a TikTok video that was sort of about this idea of someone who had they had autism. They were on the spectrum, but it wasn't sort of as severe or as noticeable as some other cases. But they obviously usually declare it, or they have to declare it when they apply for jobs and all this other stuff. They
have to
do.
declare that they're
Well,
on
I think he did, or he said something like he had. He said how much trouble it caused, or awkwardness it then causes in the interview process, because there's this thing of like, oh my god, now the company feels, we're between a rock and a hard place now. Like I can't not bring this person in because then we look like we're discriminating, so we've got to bring them in. And so they're not sure how to handle it. But I guarantee you, if there was a government, if the government was able to say, well, genetically we can say this things like, obviously this is taken to the extreme in the film, But if you could enforce this, it even says it in the film. It's it's frowned upon. Like, the government does not support this. You are not supposed to discriminate based on genetics.
Yeah, they say that.
Yeah, but then they will say, "But we've got to do a drug test, so we need some urine samples or blood samples." So then they'll do it off the back of that. And so, like, I can totally see that happening.
Yeah.
And don't forget as well, one of the things that's interesting about this film is Gattaca is an aerospace corporation. They are trying to send people into space.
Mhm.
That's all well and good. I want to go see, like, again, this is that thing of, like, it gives a very specific example. Let's go to that insurance company. Like, what does their insurance office look like? Where do are the invalids all on the phones? Are they processing paperwork? Like, where are the valids working? It's that sort of thing. I'm interested to see how it works in a more corporate environment.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's right, and I think that this, like you say, this film isn't really interested in depicting how the society came about or how it functions, and of course, it touches on eugenics, which my country helped pioneer back in the day. And I do want to say for the record, like, I mean, that response to somebody being autistic is, or just simply on the spectrum, is insane. I mean, somebody who clearly can do the job. If anything, they're going to be better at the job, aware that, well, yeah, I mean, every employer should know that they have people on the spectrum already that just have not disclosed it or don't know it, and would be a lot more efficient if they knew it and made adjustments, understanding that. And I think that I'm not a father, but you are, and also speaking as a teacher, you have the children and the students that you have, and everybody comes with advantages and disadvantages. And yes, by the time, in my case, like, by the time you get to college, you've already crossed certain thresholds, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I've known plenty of students who were diagnosed with major problems, deal with psychological ailments, deal with physical ailments, and work their butts off, and or just came into school from a background of poverty or abuse and feel like they don't belong. It's my job to love that student and help that student and help that student achieve as much as possible. And I don't know anyone, either a parent or a teacher or anyone in this kind of authority role, who would ever look at somebody and say, he's going to die when he's 30. So I'm not really going to, as a swimming coach, I'm not really going to give him the same attention. But I'm nitpicking. I mean, we should probably discuss, like, the film itself and the acting and the shots. And
we'll get to that. But the thing is, this film does propose these things. It is presenting a society based on this genetic class system, and the question is does it work? I think in the microcosm it does for this film. I like the idea and the thoughts that gone into it. But you're right, as we said, as you try and expand it and you scratch away at it, like, there are definitely issues and there's questions. But I think we should highlight, because it's almost like a weird nitpick that sort of, like, takes down a rabbit hole. But
the film opens it up to that, right? I mean, the film is an issue film, right? It is.
Yes.
So I mean, it's fair game, and the fact that we're discussing it indicates it's working.
Oh yeah, no, it does. And that's the thing I think this film does. I think some of the characters acknowledge some of these things as well. Like, Uma Thurman's character acknowledges, like, she's not, she has genetic manipulation, but in doing so, they either miss something or couldn't afford something or whatever, and so she actually has, I can't remember, is it an eye thing or is it no, it's a heart thing, isn't it?
I think it's a heart thing, but it's like it's a low level probability compared to his.
Yes, but
she still thinks she's right.
Yeah,
like,
she's like,
I'm flawed.
Yeah, and so she's like, well, I'm never going up in the ship.
My lover deserves someone with a pancreas.
Yeah, yeah. But there are little bits like that where they try to address it, and there's and they obviously try to to cross the barriers, because she then offers her hair, doesn't she? She offers like as a sample to say like, go test it. You can go see, like, here's my flaws. And he lets it fly. He drops the hair. He's like, oh, the wind caught it. He's like, I want to accept you for you. I don't give a crap about this probability of whatever you've got. And obviously that plays back later on in the film when she finds out he's Vincent, not Jerome. And so I kind of like all that. I like their relationship in a weird way. But I do want to talk about. We've talked about this film with regards to the Twilight Zone. Is the aesthetic of this film? This idea, I kind of like retrofuturism. In fact, I really like it. I think it works when it's done well. It works really well. And I like that, like, all the buildings have got this Art Deco or weird feel to them. They've got like electric cars, but they're all sort of like the 60s and 50s design. Even the way it's shot, that restaurant scene, like the way, because Uma Thurman is perfect in this role for her. She's great. I do like Uma Thurman. I think she's a great actress. But she has that, especially in the 90s, when she was younger, she has that golden age of cinema look. Those sort of like female matinee looks. Like, I can't think of an example, Greta Garbo or whatever, sort of like Lauren Bacall from the sort of like the 30s. And they film her like that. She has this tumble of hair coming down at one point, and the way they light it all feels like a sort of a 30s or 40s film. And it's absolutely fantastic. It's beautiful to see in some cases, the way that they film this. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I agree completely. And there were times where I thought that aesthetically this is a lot closer to Brazil than it is to the average Hollywood film. I mean, and there is Art Deco in that too. I mean, and this isn't as over the top. I mean, this does as Tim Burton Batman details and everything that Brazil has. But no, I mean, I found that it's that sort of like, it's very fascistic and clean, a lot of curves. No, and even the way it's shot is very beautiful. And I love retrofuturism too. I mean, that's why we both love another great Jude Law film, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow.
Yeah, it's great film.
I'm just joking.
I love that film. It's great.
I love the idea of that film.
It's good fun. It's not all right. It doesn't work out well, but it looks great.
But I'm with you, and you're quite right to point out her hair. I mean, that's the curls are very much a sort of throwback. And yeah, I mean, even the coiffured look of Jude Law and Ethan Hawke goes back to an earlier era of sort of the 40s and earlier.
Well, even like you say, even before, at the very start of the film, like, it says like in the not too distant future, is this the idea? But then you find out he's conceived in this sort of like, old American car, this Americana, I forget what car it is now, but it's like a very distinctive sort of like, car from the 70s. And then when you see that what he's wearing as a kid and as a teenager, there's a very 50s look to it, like, bowling shirts with the stripes, the white stripes down them, and there's a certain type of trouser, I forget the call now, but that wide leg sort of trouser, sort of like,
like bell bottoms.
Yeah, but like straight down, they're sort of the trousers from the sort of the 30s. They're sort of like, high waist and sort of straight down, sort of like, there's this look throughout it that you're like, they're trying to make this sort of like timeless. Like, they want it to be set in the future, but it's got that timeless look. Much like, weirdly, it made me think of like Batman the Animated Series. That sort of that timeless look.
Again, sort of, Art Deco is, a common attribute in all of this.
Yeah. But even the other you say about sort of Brazil, like where he's sat typing out the code or the mathematics for the launch and the sort of the flight path and stuff, like it's those curved desks, isn't it? Little mini kiosks, but they're all in a row. And they're all sat there typing away. Like that very much felt like that sort of Brazil bureaucracy and stuff. So yeah, I can see that.
The same thing. I mean, I do find that again, I keep playing devil's advocate. I really like this movie. It's a good movie. Nobody has cell phones, right?
Mhm.
But one company is responsible for 12 rockets a day, and their flight paths are determined by people.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just typing in their flight paths, it's like, I mean, that is mind-boggling.
Mm. Well, yeah, and I like the fact that, and again, that comes back to this idea of the retrofuturism, isn't it? It's going back to this idea of, 50s ideas of space travel and all this other stuff. And yeah, weirdly, the fact that like mobile phones, I mean, this film obviously was made, was released in 1997, so let's say 96, wherever it was conceived. It's just on that cusp of mobile phone technology really sort of taking off, or at least the early versions of it. So it's not even a consideration in this film, even in a sci-fi way. It's not there. It's just not even considered. Um, but they do. But like you say, yet they have genetics and computers and all that kind of stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that. I mean, and the more I think of it, the more I love your Twilight Zone comparison, right?
mm,
By the way, if you love the Twilight Zone, we're on Patreon doing
yes,
talking about the Twilight Zone every week. We're huge fans. But in the same way, like that does explain the sort of play-like feel of the script. I mean, it does explain the sort of like very limited scope, but it also explains this sort of vision of the future that even just putting aside the rockets and putting aside like the logistics of space flights and trajectories, that those ideas of the Twilight Zone were to take an idea and extrapolate or to explore this. And the
mm,
Twilight Zone also was against conformity and has episodes
mhm,
that are painfully just like, by the way, conformity's wrong.
yeah,
I was thinking of there's that one where that guy is like, I guess I can't bring my friends into work, and he's sort of
yes,
in cubicles too and has a silly desk. Um, whereas Ethan Hawke is meticulous because he's hiding his genetic
mm,
code. Um, yeah, I mean, but it's not intended. This film is not intending to really give a full depiction of the future. It's not intending to say, let's sit down, great minds, and think, what will the future be like in 20 years? It's
yeah.
saying, let's focus on this one thing and tell a story based on it.
Yeah, and I like it because of its simplicity, because of that. Like, you could extrapolate this and make it like if you were to take this and become a TV show, like an HBO, Max kind of show, you could explore so much. Like, there's so much potential to take this and roll with it. But within this world, I do like all that sort of stuff. I kind of like the idea of the police as well. Um, you know, Alan Arkin as a sort of like this sort of detective, you know, and I go, you don't know, I don't know whether he's an invalid or a valid, but there's sort of this thing around the police, and then Anton, the brother, being this sort of senior detective, and then so that you get just, I like the idea of the police, the murder investigation is nicely, the murder investigation is completely, oh, I don't say a non-event because it drives the plot, but
Mm.
that's all it is. It's a cipher. Like, the plot becomes a cipher for the discussion around Vincent's character. But what are your thoughts on this idea of the brother? And like, so he obviously, because Vincent leaves without saying goodbye, and so Anton drops a line later on. He says, "Yeah, when you left, look, we just assumed you were dead. Like, mum and dad just thought that you were dead."
Because he'd be
Um,
over 30 by now. So,
yes,
yeah.
yeah. They just mourned you and wrote you off. So there's this idea of this resentment and this competition between the two. And again, it obviously comes back to the thing of being a valid versus an invalid. Um, but then obviously by deception, Ethan Hawke is able to get to a more senior position than his brother. I kind of like it, but sometimes it's a little messy. It's unclear, I think, at times.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea is that, their parents had their first kid and they were, not hippies, but they believed in just, we're having a kid. That's great. We're going to have this
Yeah.
natural birth thing. And then they see, oh, there's that scene where they're being read all of the problems, and they're like, we've made a terrible mistake.
Mm,
Um, and there are issues raising him with this, just with the society. discrimination. And so their second, they opt for, the genetic manipulation. And it's really clear that the younger brother, I mean, it's interesting to me that the older brother is the flawed one, because that tends to go against, I mean, typically the older brother is the brash, one that gets all of the attention, and younger brothers sometimes achieve more. There's this stereotype that first children achieve more, but when younger siblings achieve more, it's often because less was expected of them. And so the older brother, as I am, winds up being like the golden boy who failed and, being depressed all the time about my lack of accomplishment. And the younger child is like, hey, it's all gravy. I got to excel, work hard, But anyway, I mean, I found that dynamic interesting, even though it is kind of like reversed and it's clear that Ethan Hawke, that Vincent is not happy with this discrimination, that the parents basically write off the older sibling. I think the swimming thing kind of like, it's evocative, and I love the wave. I love the ocean. I love the waves. It's beautiful. The swimming thing is evocative and beautiful, I think, but I'm annoyed when the older brother comes back and happens to be the police detective, and they're like, golly gee, let's go for a swim again. I can still beat you. It seems like, really?
It's an element of melodrama in this that sort of feels slightly out of place. Although again, it's that sort of, it depicts. I get why it's there. I understand that it's this thing again at the end where, when they have that final swim after the confrontation, like Vincent's sort of, Vincent playing Jerome is sort of free. He could sort of carry on, but he knows his brother's sort of onto him. And so this confrontation, like, he could have just arrested him and taken him in, like, but it's going to become this sort of brotherly confrontation. And at that point, like, Vincent is very much like, they've got nothing to lose. Like, I've got to win this to sort of like, to really, it's almost like spiteful. It's like, for Vincent's almost like, I've got to win this to not only prove I could do that, but I can do this again. I beat you once, I can beat you again. And so I'm almost convinced that, like, when they go into that, Vincent would swim until he died as long as he beat his brother.
Well, I think it's also like a referendum on, are you going to turn me in, right? Like, yeah, you're a cop. I am your lost brother who's achieved this due to deception. You've got a decision to make, and your decision is based on, you were the good one, and I am the screw up who, has cheated my way into this status. All right, well, I'll prove it to you. I'll prove that I deserve this. But that seems, I mean, I thought that was the most sort of like Mary Sue annoying point, right? Yes. Because you shouldn't have to swim further than your cop brother to show that you've merited this position. And either you have or you haven't. And based on the treadmill results, you clearly are a risk. You should not be sent up into space. And I say this despite, I mean, I don't want a culture to be this discriminatory and conformist and all of that. But the second your recording stops, your heart is beating like a drum. Well, it seems like it's a test case, right? Like, if I can beat you, you're not going to turn me in, right?
Yes, and unfortunately, it feels a bit. It doesn't work for me. I get what it's trying to do, but what I wanted would be something, less melodramatic, less thing. It's like, having seen this, like, because going back as well, we talk about sort of Vincent as well. You talk about the parents and stuff before I get to the end. There's a bit at the very beginning that when he's born, the first child's born, the mother says, or the nurse says, what's his name? And the mother says Anton, and the father intercedes and says, no, his name's Vincent Anton. So because you find out the father's name is Anton. And so he doesn't want to, after knowing the genetic, like, this thing of being a natural born or an invalid or whatever, straight away from the moment of birth, he's having something taken away from him. And then obviously the second born is called Anton, and that's sort of like, a part of this resentment. What I would rather have had is the brother just acknowledge it. Be like, you know what, you were this, you know, to me you were Vincent when you left that. This is even probably more bloody melodramatic, but like when you left the house, you were Vincent Freeman. You're now Jerome Morrow. Like, you know, you have proven yourself. Like, I can see that you can do this. You know, as a brother, I stand by you, sort of thing. Like, I will keep your secret or whatever, and then walk away. Just leave it at that. Like, you know, you beat me, and I can see that you've done better, and I don't have to have this sort of resentment anymore or something. I don't know. It just, the swimming thing feels a bit. It just feels a bit silly. I get it as kids, like I understand it, this thing of chicken, so I know it's got to come back.
Yeah,
it feels like a childish thing to do. So when they do it as adults, it still feels childish. And so,
yeah. I mean, I think that role of like you deserved it is sort of the closest we get to that is the scientist who tests his urine and a surprise test the day of his flight. And you know, it's believable, but it kind of annoys me that, you know, Ethan Hawke, Vincent, is prepared for everything, but isn't, you know, prepared with an extra bag of urine he could throw out just in case he needs it. But I mean, this is such a minor nitpick. But I mean, that's sort of, by the end of the movie, you've had many people, including Uma Thurman, including his brother, yes or no, including, you know, the cop who's just, yeah, the cop doesn't seem to, Alan Arkin, who, another fine performance, doesn't seem to really care about this genetic stuff. He's just pursuing his job and pursuing his man. He doesn't seem to really care, say anything about that, about invalids. And then you have this final scientist. So by the end, it seems as if he's been rubber stamped by a lot of people. It also seems like Gore Vidal, his mission manager, isn't concerned about invalids, you know. So, I mean, which I'm okay with. I mean, is this phenomenon of like, you know, whether it's, you know, watch any movie about a Christian camp that's being holier than thou, nobody believes it, you know. You know, how many people in the Nazi hierarchy really believe this mumbo jumbo, spiritualist mumbo jumbo? So I get that, but you know, you're right. And it's like what you're describing is like the parallel to how I often feel like, why are these characters not honest with each other?
Yeah.
You know, like why, like the brother never has that conversation with Vincent, and Vincent, you know, can't come clean with, you know, Uma Thurman. And
yeah, there's times it works and times it doesn't, and that's the thing, because it carries on. It starts to stumble. Like keeping it from Uma Thurman, I completely get, because like she's an employee of Gattaca, and there'd be that thing of like, if he was to be outright and be like, it would just destroy everything he's done, and it comes out later, and when it does, I kind of like her reaction. Like, so when she takes Anton to the house, and you've had Jude Law like pulling himself up those stairs to get to that seat in time and stuff, and she just sort of rolls with it, and that's when she acknowledges, like, you know, oh, I've been, you know, she sort of knows it, but like this is that final confirmation she's been completely deceived. And the fact she just rolls with it and sort of like, you know, and then Ethan Hawke comes up the stairs. I like all that as well. Like, I think that's really good, and it's a great moment, because that's the moment when it should all go wrong. Like she could run out, she could drop them all in it, and that's the sort of the moment when Vincent's like, yeah, we're done. Like, this is everything I've worked for is gone at this point. But Jerome's like, no, I think there's a way around this. Like, she clearly loves you. Like, she's clearly, you know, she feels something for you. She covered for you in front of the police. Like, don't be silly. And so, you know, I feel that as you get to the end, again, like, it's sort of some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. When it comes to this thing of who's telling who what, and the brothers then resulting in the swimming sort of just feels like that push to more. The scientist, though, because I do want to talk about the relationship with Uma Thurman, because there's a couple of bits that I really like. But that scientist, I like the actor. He's one of those people that just turns up in things and you go, oh, he's cool, I like him. He makes a drop line again at the end that throughout the film, obviously, you know, Vince had to go in for blood tests and urine tests and all this other shit. And then at the end, like you said, there's a surprise one before they get onto the ship. And he hasn't set himself up a bag, like he hasn't taken one. So you're right, it's a mistake. It's a you would be. You'd be routinely doing it, wouldn't you? You'd to cover yourself. But that becomes irrelevant because obviously, well, it sort of if it fails, it brings up as Vincent, and the guy says, "Oh, yes, I haven't told you about my son." He's like, "No." He says, "Oh, you're a bit of a hero of his." And at first, you're supposed to think because it's before the Vincent thing pops up. You're supposed to think like, "Oh, he admires this guy because of how good he is." Like how genetically pure he is and how good he is ready for this to be an astronaut. And then obviously there's the realization that, oh no, this scientist guy is known all along, or at least suspected, because he says that, a right-handed guy doesn't hold it with his left when he's been doing the urine tests. And so when the Vincent thing pops up, he pops it, he says, yeah, you're fine, and makes it go away. And he can get on the spaceship and he lets him go. And you realize, at least in my head, this guy's got an invalid kid, and he's telling him at home, I'm not maybe not go off and pretend to be somebody else, but there are ways like you could be an astronaut. Like, I know this person. I don't want to tell you who he is, but it feels there's more to that, and I kind of like that it's just a drop line, that it's just a moment. It's sort of that final hurdle. And it's I don't think it's supposed to be a moment of tension. I don't think there's a great deal of moments of massive tension in this film, but it's a nice nod for me that says, "Oh no, someone knew all along and had your back." And
and it also helps. It also helps explain how successful he's been, right? With
yes,
I mean, we don't see his penis while he's urinating, so I mean, it is one of the strangest lines. The discussion of how well endowed he is, but it's not clear if he has a prosthetic penis that this is attached to. Is sometimes it's used in faking drug tests. As I've had to do for all my sports. But it's not clear how that has worked. But it does make it a little more believable. And I did find that moment kind of touching, the same way I found Uma Thurman kind of touching as she returns the favor and drops, the real hair, Vincent's real hair, and refuses to get tested.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, like those human moments, because I think the relationship between Vincent, and Irene is actually kind of touching. It becomes a nice sort of through line for the film, and especially that moment, like I say, where like she's obviously fallen for him, and then she finds it all out, and she's still able to let it slide. She's able to sort of carry on. I don't know. It just, the relationship sort of works because it comes out of necessity, but then builds to become something else. And is she going to be waiting for him when he gets back or something? I don't know, but it's.
Yeah, I mean, I think she is, right. There's this discussion, and she says a year isn't that long. But curiously, I mean, I feel like all I'm saying are negative shit, and I like this movie. It's a good movie, but curiously, I feel like there's no chemistry between them. Like, I like that relationship, but there's no chemistry. I mean, they kiss and they have that. A year isn't that long, but and she feels. I get the sense that she feels closer to him because he has overlooked her heart condition.
Yeah.
And then she sort of returns the favor and overlooks his. But, I find myself thinking about how I don't think, look, I mean, there once was a time in which people got married for money and, fame or whatever. I guess some people still do. But that used to be all it was about. The idea that love entered into it at all was, like, what entitled jerk off are you to think that? Nowadays we're completely in the opposite camp, and I think nowadays we'd say, if I love someone and want to really be intimate and honest and close with them, I wouldn't care if they have any kind of condition. I mean, none of us know it's the end of Blade Runner, right? With the original that I like better. None of us know how long we have anyway. I find that quite touching. But I think this movie, in their relationship, it feels colder. Strangely, it feels colder than Blade Runner. I don't feel any. get what's going on, but I don't feel any chemistry between them. I don't know that they're in love. Or
No, I agree, and I had to think about this because there's a scene where they do end up in bed together. I mean, you don't see anything; you just see that the morning after and all this other stuff. But you see that the lead up to that, and they go to this. They've obviously been to the restaurant, and then they go to the solar panel park, and all this other stuff. And I'm watching that, and for the same as what you're saying, I'm like, it feels cold, but is that intentional? Like, because every interaction in this film has felt cold. You know, whenever you see sort of like them interact with the mission controller, or even between like Jerome and Vincent, like, you know, by the end of the film, like, they're supposed to have this sort of like respect and admiration for each other, but it never really feels like that. So when, like, you know, when sort of Vincent says to him at the end, sorry, Jerome says to him at the end about sort of like, you know, you gave me your, you know, I gave you my body, but you gave me your dreams. I like the sentiment, but it never feels impassioned, and so I don't think. I don't think it's supposed to be. You know, so this world feels cold in that way.
No, you're right, and I think that is deliberate. You know, the reason why Jude Law doesn't feel, you know, compassionate there is because he's obviously a sex android. But you know, I mean, I think what's missing to me in that scene is, and I do think it's deliberate, but what's missing is, you know, any statement of "I love you," any statement of thanks, any statement of "I'm proud of you." You know, these sort of like frank emotional statements nobody ever makes in the movie. And obviously that's got to be deliberate. Although I do find show after show, movie after movie, I'm like, I say I love you and hug people all the time. Like, no, there are so many relationships where I'm like, how are you married or having an affair? And nobody ever does this. Where that's normal, I guess. But yeah, this is clearly cold. But I mean, you know, it does. That's clearly deliberate, but it still sort of leaves you wanting a little.
It does, and I agree, because what I would sort of hope for is, in this cold world, you know, you've got this guy who's deceiving to get through things. Like, having some warm relationships, even a spark of it in some way, would go a long, long way to showing all that kind of thing. And the closest you get actually is really between Jerome and Vincent, when they go out for like a night out, you know, and they show this sort of like friendship then, and they know the hostess and all this other stuff. Like, that's about the closest you get really in the whole film. Everything else is a very sort of functional, cold relationship. You know, there's a moment where they listen to music or something, which is there's a great point I want to make up. There's like, they listen to the music, and you see them sort of like, you know, their hands touch, and they end up holding hands. And it, like, you know, which is, it's a nice shot, but it doesn't seem to be reflected in anything else they do. So yeah, I agree. It feels cold, but I do think it's intentional. I do think it's sort of, whether it's the right choice is a different answer, a different question.
Right, and if we're going to criticize, sort of like, we don't need the Spielbergian action scenes of Minority Report.
Exactly.
But the flip side is that what Spielberg, you know, is the director par excellence for, is that emotional connection with characters, and that is also missing. And I could do with a little more of that without the action spectacles.
Well, you know, with the acceptance in this film should come a thawing. That's sort of what you'd expect. And maybe it's too cliched. Maybe again it's that, you know, melodrama. I don't know. But Uma Thurman being cold at the beginning of the film makes sense. Like, she's lived this life. She's worked in this corporation. She expects that people are going to look down on her because she has this potential for a heart condition. So she's not top flight. So she sort of almost accepted her role, like she's above others, but she's below some others. And so this idea of acceptance should start to thaw that, to sort of make her less, or this relationship less cold. And it, like you say, it doesn't get there. At the end of the film, that final farewell, or that final sort of like, you know, scene doesn't feel like a thawing in that sort of way.
Yeah, it does feel cold, and I come back to this issue of just honesty and intimacy. And I know that other people, I mean, God knows the average man has terrible problems with intimacy. Having said that, I feel like there are so many moments in this film in which certainly Vincent is a phenomenal liar. He comes up with so many great lines, explanations. Jude Law also, I am rehabilitating in this wheelchair. I had an accident. I'm fine, right? How dare you accuse me? He's, he uses his privilege to, defer as a shield. And, these characters are all very skilled in lying. And this might be a commentary, again, on how cold and sort of fascistic the society is. But I find myself like, okay, when it is pretty clear, I mean, another character who seems to know is the janitor, right? I mean, because there was a janitor who sees Ethan Hawke looking at the window going, I'm going to be in there someday.
Yeah.
Never comes back. Is never like, I recognize that executive. Gosh darn it, you did it. But I mean, it seems to me, except for the Jude Law character, Vincent has no one to confide in. And so that's why that friendship of people who really wouldn't get along, wouldn't have met each other under other circumstances, become sort of friends. But how exhausting must it be? And how can, I often think, it's crystal clear, once you're running from the cops with your girlfriend, it's time to say, there's something I've been meaning to tell you, honey.
Yeah.
I mean, and roll the dice and hope to be understood and tolerated. Nobody ever does that.
No, I agree, and it's sort of, it becomes almost like a film cliche, isn't it? It's one of those things that, if they were honest in the first 10 minutes of this film wouldn't have happened. That's not quite this film, but you're right with the relationships. And again, it comes back to this thing of like, it's a bit of a plot contrivance, but also like it has to propel the plot. So, they're going to let certain things go a certain way in a cliched fashion. However, having said that, this film could have gone a very different way, because that moment when he does escape from the restaurant and he headbutts the policeman and stuff like that, in certain other hands, this would have all of a sudden become a chase movie and you'd have had the end of Minority Report. So I'm glad they don't do that. It does go, the way it goes. So yeah, but we even talk about relationships. We talk about moments of thawing or sort of moments of sincerity. The moment that Jerome sort of like reveals that he's actually been gathering and storing all this stuff to give to Vincent, is kind of touching. But like you said, it's kind of touching. It's obviously leading to something. But you said you didn't buy his suicide at the end of the film.
Well, I don't buy. First of all, are they going to detect this body? Like, you're going to come back to. Is he paying a mortgage? Can he die and a year pass and nobody detect his body or know that he's dead? First of all, and then secondly, why wouldn't you want to be around? It seems strange. But what I object to most of all is, of all the means of self-murder or whatever you want to call it, death by burning alive is probably the least convincing.
Well, it's this incinerator, and it's an interesting thing because this house basically has like a lab. It's like, if you were to break in, you'd be like, Christ, this is a meth lab. Like, there's something going on here. There's all kinds of test tubes and stuff. But they have this incinerator. And so, this incinerator is every morning, Ethan Hawke climbs into it and he sort of like brushes himself down to get off any loose skin, and he runs it through his hair to make sure, or any loose hairs or anything goes into this incinerator. And then every now and then they put like other things in, like used clothes and that sort of thing goes in and gets incinerated. So it's completely evaporated, destroyed. It's literally incinerated. So yeah, so the reason that that Jerome climbs in there is because if he was to commit suicide in the flat, like you say, that's a body just sat there. It's the only way because it's Jerome it's almost like Jerome's final gift, weirdly, to Vincent is like a neat ending. Like he climbs into this incinerator and that's it. Like he will be, not only will he be killed, but he'll be his body will be destroyed. So there's no evidence of this thing. This thing will go away.
How hot does it have to be to destroy bone?
No idea. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to Google that just in case. But I'm pretty sure it's not that hot because you think about it, that's what crematoriums do. Like it incinerates, the vast majority. Then they just grind down the last bit. So. And no one's looking for Jerome though because they all think he's on a spaceship on a 1 year mission. So, if anything, him being away and Jerome being there and still receiving food and all this other stuff would have been a giveaway. So it's almost like I feel like his suicide is almost like this is the inevitable ending of this film. But
You're right.
it is hard to take. But I understand. I understand why.
Take a pill. And put the incinerator on. I mean, he's closed the door already. I mean, put the incinerator on a timer just so you're dead before the flames hit. I mean, death by burning is not a good way to die.
No.
That's all I mean. But you're quite right. I mean, that's a very good point about like food deliveries and things like this. I mean, although, he gets away with going around town. I mean, he's not as careful as he could be. But yeah, I mean, point taken. Symbolically, it works, right? That he's the detritus. And I will say, I love all the scenes of Ethan Hawke scrubbing and preparing every day.
Yeah.
And making the fake fingertip with a little repository of blood and, scrubbing himself down. It really is. They take a lot of time. They don't rush those scenes and they repeat it several times. And I felt it very effective. Even moving, and it seemed to me to be dramatizing or to really hammer home the cost of passing, whether passing, and it's only really in those moments that I feel that the film really transcends this sort of like anti-ableist theme, not that it needs to, but into sort of passing, whether it's passing for straight, passing for white, passing for any other thing that we discriminate for. This daily grind, how much society imposes on those who are forced to fit in. Yeah.
Well, it's all like I say. Yeah, I do love it because I also love it. The night he spends with Irene when he wakes up in the morning and he panics. He's like, he realizes like there's a pillow with his hair and sails on, and he runs down to the beach next to her house, and he just grabs like a stone, like any stone, and starts rubbing himself next to the sea. And so there's this desperation in that moment of like, I can't get home, but I've got to carry on with this thing, and I've got to continue this routine. And like you say, it's this daily grind of maintaining this level of perfection to not be found out, and like that drives me insane. Like that's really hard work, and it comes back to this thing like the sacrifice of self. He has sacrificed pretty much everything else to facilitate this one dream. And there's a level of commitment. Well, they even joke about it, don't they? The commitment, because he's what, like a 2 inches or an inch shorter than Jude Law, and so they cut his legs and
elongate his legs. But that is how it's done.
Yeah. And so that's then obviously I like a demonstration of that is like he's obviously had to then create a lie to explain these scars. So if anyone ever sees them, he's got this thing. He talks about some car. So do you know what height the bumper or the fender of whatever this car is? Like that's it. And he's so used to it, he even says it to Irene after she knows the truth.
Yeah.
And she even says to him, like, you're so used to saying that lie that you can't say otherwise. And so I like that it's just so ingrained in him, this whole thing, this routine and this thing.
Yeah, and again, I find that routine kind of heartbreaking, and I think that it is a great dramatization of how, I mean, and we've heard this with a lot of, whether it's Me Too, whether it's, talking about trans rights, talking about, all of these social issues, the way in which being forced to conform to these expectations of society is exhausting. And you see those scenes, and you're just like, he does this every day. Like this is just the amount of time and attention and pain involved just on a daily basis. Forget the surgery is painful to watch, to think,
Yeah.
wow, this is not a good society
Yeah.
that makes somebody do this. And then you think, oh, wait, we kind of do this too. And I think the film works better at those moments. I think that's very effective. The thing with the bumper is one of those things where I think, okay, that's clever. It's well written. But and maybe this is just me wanting him to be more honest. But it's like, she already knows. Like, why can't he say, yeah, I had to have the surgery to be 2 inches taller?
I feel it's more like force of habit, though, isn't it? For him, it's like it just regurgitates. It's like, oh, if they're spotted, I say this. Like it's almost like a Pavlovian response. He can't help himself because he smiles about it when she sort of calls him on it. He's like, yeah, it is bullshit. So but yeah.
Scenes like that, and this is not the only movie that makes me feel that way. Make me feel like Michael Corleone's family in The Godfather. Like, why don't you just tell her, I love you with all my heart. Just it's okay.
That's like a rom-com ending, though, isn't it? When you end up them running to the airport or whatever to catch them before they leave.
She's standing looking up, right? That's because that's set up, right? She watches every flight. We don't see her watching that.
That's actually what I was going to ask about the end of this film. So the very ending of this film, we talked about the scientist and getting on the spaceship. Do you feel that the ending of this film is triumphant? Is it?
That's a good question. I think so. I think it wants to be, but it doesn't feel. Again, it's emotionally a very flat film, and I think, yeah, we want him to succeed, right? I mean, how sad would it be if he's found out and all of this was for nothing, and society just tramped him down, right?
Yeah. So other films would have done that, but yeah, it's again that thing of expectation. It is a triumphant ending. He succeeds. He gets his dream, but it never feels like a fist pumping kind of triumphant moment. It's still a very quiet. It's like a quiet triumph. It's almost like you're not supposed to be cheering about this because then he'll be found out. But I like the ending. But yeah, it's flat, emotionally flat. Is an interesting sort of is a good way of describing it.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I mean, it's very well done. The way the shadow and the light comes through that, I mean, of course they're in suits and this rocket and what exactly are they? Why does it need them again? It doesn't really. I don't know. It doesn't matter. What exactly is their mission? Why? None of this really matters. But it's a beautiful shot. It's a nice shot to end on. But yeah, I find it sort of flat.
Yeah.
What there's an after credit sequence in which I don't know if you stuck to the end of the credits, in which he has just gone into outer space and as because you see he looking at the Earth from space, and just a minute later he has a heart attack and everybody else is stuck with a dead body in the capsule for the rest of the year.
I thought you were going to say he gets up there and the after scene is him and he meets Thanos in space. And
that's my standard joke about all movies. Is like I'll watch watch like Dune or Blade Runner or something, some good stuff, and I'll say, like, when does Thanos get here?
Yeah, it could well be linked in. One of the things I would say, one of the things I was interested in, I wanted your sort of take on this because it sort of struck me a little bit. And there are films that do this. You said about there's been a play. This felt to me like a short story. not in length, but literally. So this felt like I could easily read this story and it be a short story from a short story collection of like Asimov or Dick or one of those writers from that era, or even like from an anthology of like best sci-fi collections and whatever. Like it feels like it would fit into that thing. I could easily sort of see this being a sort of a, I don't know, like a 90 or 100-page sort of like, I don't know, like a longish but short story. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. It just, that's how it came across to me. Like this would be a very sort of specific short story.
Yeah, I can see that too. And I think that yeah, I mean that has to do with sort of like its limited scope and how much time is spent between lines of dialogue on images, on the feel of this environment. And yet it's never boring. I mean, compared to, Solaris or Stalker, it's much more captivating minute by minute. So I mean, I could totally see what you're talking about.
Yeah, it just to feel as I got to the end of it, I was like, oh, I can imagine this was an adaptation of one of those sort of like stories. And like you say, if this had been adapted by Verhoeven or Spielberg or Bay or someone like that, like this film would have gone in a different direction.
And it's impossible to imagine, right? I mean, it succeeds and fails, and it largely succeeds because of those specific choices. And you add a little bit more emotion, I think it still works. But you go too saccharine and you don't believe that this is really an oppressive society, right?
Yes,
it loses its tone.
Yes, exactly. I agree. I mean, to me, one of the films I did think about again when I was considering this afterwards is The Island, which is a Michael Bay film, which is Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson, which is a similar thing of like, spoilers for a film that's probably 25 years old, but or even 20 years old. It's about clones and about them sort of and the society that has them and that sort of thing. So, but that is played as an action film. That's more of a sort of a chase film and that sort of thing. So that, and when I thought about it, I was like, oh, this could have been that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm glad it wasn't.
Absolutely. And I don't need, I mean, look, we both love Total Recall. I mean, we love, versions of that sort of film. And the whole detective plot, as you say, is really just a plot device. And Alan Arkin's character doesn't seem particularly concerned with, the whole invalid situation. He's just concerned with catching a murderer. I did want to say that the mission commander, you find out that Gore Vidal has perpetrated this murder, and we have learned previously. I mean, basically, the suspects are, right? Who are the suspects, right? We know it's not Vincent. The suspects are Uma Thurman or Gore Vidal. That's it, right? It's a murder mystery with two suspects. And one is the love interest. So unless you're going to turn her into a femme fatale, and you find out that the mission commander has spat in the eye of the man that he's killed, and that's how they identify his DNA. So it's again, I feel like I'm so nitpicking, but I know we're supposed to think that, I mean, the mission commander has done this because the guy he killed was against this specific mission that Vincent is being set on. Well, they launched 12 rockets a day. Yeah. They clearly, have missions this far out all the time. Why was this mission so important? I mean, I know that there's a window every 70 years.
That's it.
Wants to launch it.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, the only thing you get is that there's a very specific window for the destination they're trying to get to, and the mission control or whatever is determined to see it in his lifetime. So if it misses it, it's another 70 years, and so he'll miss it in his lifetime. That's it. And the weird thing is, because the mission controller says, like, at one point he is confronted and he says, "Oh, you can check my file, and there's there isn't a violent bone in my body." But everyone has obviously a breaking point. But there's a difference. There is a difference between an impulse lashing out and hitting someone with a keyboard. That's an impulse weapon, and running away, and then or doing that and spitting in the face of the person you've just killed, especially in a world where you know that genetic material can be traced this quickly. You're right. The whole plot, the whole mystery. It's not a mystery because the film isn't even bothered. Like you say, it doesn't even try and give you any potential that Uma Thurman is the killer. Like, if there was a drop line or even there was a sort of a there's not even a suggestion of it ever. So yeah, it's irrelevant. It's almost like it's only there to provide tension for Vincent to propel his plot.
Yeah, I mean, she says I'm glad he's dead, and everybody hated him. But yeah, that's about it.
But one of the things, and again, it's a nitpicky kind of thing. It kind of annoys me because I kind of like police procedurals and all that kind of thing. Like, I'm not NCIS or any of that sort of thing, but I kind of like silly ones, Bones or Castle. But I do know that forensics, even in the 90s, and that was relatively good. And this film tells us that they go around with little mini hoovers picking up all kinds of crap, and that's how they find the eyelash. Yet at no point do they check the exterior of the corpse
Yeah.
for foreign genetic material.
Golly gee, we missed that spit in his eye.
Yeah, and that feels like a really sort of like, so the mystery resolution at the end of the film feels so rushed and so sort of like perfunctory that I'm almost like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's so irrelevant to the in the grand scheme of things, that even like the filmmakers are like, yeah, we know, like, we'll just resolve it in a minute.
Sure. Yeah, we gave you Gore Vidal. What more do you want?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You get that in Alan Arkin, sort of like, sort of barking around. So, be happy with that.
No, and I am for the most part. But I mean, the list of things that I do have complaints about. I mean, I guess I could also throw in that Alan Arkin's investigative procedures, you were talking about hoovering up the stuff and not finding the spit. I mean, is essentially, we're going to test people. Yeah. And he insists on, testing the staff there later on. But initially it's, let's round up some invalids. And so you see, this is really the one glimpse you see of life outside of this sort of like elite circle. Are these, basically it's like it looks like homeless people. It's just like, if you're invalid, you basically can't get a job, and you might be a janitor, but you clearly are subject to searches and seizures and, police taking advantage of you. Presumably that's illegal because, there's this whole, like, it's not okay to, if it's not okay to discriminate in employment, it's probably not okay to do this. I don't know.
In policing, yeah. Stop and search. Don't know. Yeah.
Why does he go to that posh restaurant? And
yeah, that one's the one that bothers me a little bit, because he clearly thinks that someone is like Vincent is impersonating someone. I think that's it, but it's never confirmed. But again, like that, that side of things. If you were to give this film, I don't know, what's this film, sort of like 1 hour 40. I don't know how long it is, but like, if you were to give it an extra 5-10 minutes, like, you could expand on you could actually make the mystery worthwhile just with a couple of extra scenes. But yeah, that's not what they're there for. As a final thought before we sort of wrap up, you just said something there that again, one of the things that made me think about a sort of like short story and a literary side to this is this idea of referring to them as invalids. And we obviously know the English language can be an absolute clunky mess, because invalid and invalid are spelled exactly the same. And so I was like, okay, sometimes it's a little on the nose, because if you're an invalid, you're an invalid. Vincent's surname is Freeman. And so there's a few times I was like, oh, okay, like, that's.
Yeah, but that stuff, I mean, in fairness to your point, that stuff was also very naming was also very common in, earlier fiction, especially mid-century stuff. So,
well, that was my question. It was like, is that sort of like a, does that part of this retrofuturism where those sorts of names? Because if, again, that sort of feels like something you'd get in the Twilight Zone, doesn't it? Where you'd get that naming convention that sort of like a little bit on the nose. So I was curious about that, but it's good. Anyway, we're going to wrap up. Come up to the end now. So, Julian, final thoughts on 1997's Gattaca.
Well, I'm really glad that I saw it. I can't believe I went this long without seeing it, and it's referenced everywhere. I think everyone should see it. I think it was built up too much in my head, and you have to go in knowing it's this small story that's sort of like a Twilight Zone episode. So it's a good movie. I mean, we've spent 2 hours nitpicking this thing to death and bring, but that's what we do. But that doesn't mean that you can't appreciate it despite all of this. And it is captivating, and it is without a doubt, far and above average. A truly good movie.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed this. It's been a while since I've seen this, probably 10, 15 years. And so I was really glad to go back and see it. The performances are good. Like you said, despite the sort of the emotionally flat thing, like pretty much across the board, everyone is good in this. Jude Law, Ethan Hawke, sort of in their 90s, sort of, they're coming up and sort of their screen presence is great. Uma Thurman is fantastic. And I think it's got a really good cast. It's a really solid cast, and they do this story. Credit. It's told well. It looks beautiful. I mean, there are some great scenes in this that look fantastic. The locales are really cool. It looks unusual. It's just a small story. It's just a very sort of focused story. It makes me think of those other films. I think of Ex Machina or one of those other stories where it's like, we are going to, as you say, we're going to extrapolate this one thing and we're going to do this with it. Taking it in that sort of Twilight Zone ethos, if we're going to take it in that sort of direction, I really enjoyed this film. It's not going to be on heavy rotation. Like, it's not one I'm going to go back to frequently. But I'll probably watch this again in a couple of years, or if I was to come across it. But yeah, I'll watch that. That's good. It's a solid film. It's better than some of the other crap that came out in 1997 anyway. So, but it's definitely, just be aware, if you are going to watch this, it is a sci-fi film. This is one of those films that you're going in. Like, it's not a blockbuster. It's not a mainstream sort of sci-fi actioner. It's very much a science fiction film, and I kind of enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it for that. So, yes. So that's Gattaca. So, before we move on to sort of the outros, we're doing a bit of a twofer in the next 2 episodes. And so this is going to lead into something else that we're going to do in the future, which we'll talk about down the line. But we're doing the next film is a Spanish film called, Christ, I forgot what it's called already.
Open Your Eyes.
Thank you. Open Your Eyes. Which was remade shortly after as Vanilla Sky, and we're going to be doing that. So next week, or next episode, sorry, we're going to do Open Your Eyes, and then the episode after, we're doing Vanilla Sky. So we're going to do back to back, an original and a remake, see how that sort of translates. See if we pick up on the same themes and those sorts of things. I'm really quite interested to see how this sort of works for us.
I think it is fascinating. And having seen both of these and thought about it, I think it's fascinating to sort of see 2 versions of that are both close, but both also very different, with different actors and different choices, and both have things to recommend them. And so I think we'll really.
Penelope Cruz is in both, isn't she?
Yes, which is very telling, because it's like, no, she nailed that part, but we need a leading man, so we'll recast. We need Tom Cruise.
Yeah, back to Tom Cruise in early 2000s. So that's what we're doing in the next couple of episodes. So it's going to be quite exciting, and that will take us to our sort of finale of this, or at least this season of the sort of thing. Before we sort of do our Terry Gilliam little move, we're going to be talking The Fountain, which I'm very excited for. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what we're doing, if you enjoyed us talking about this, come and find us on social media at PodTimeSpace. Tell us what you think of Gattaca. Are we right? Are we wrong? Would you be, actually let us know. Would you use genetic manipulation for your own children or yourself? I'm curious to know. But also, if you're
trying, but it doesn't work.
Yeah. I think there's certain things, hair management would probably be something I'm follically challenged.
Like a punch to the gut, Scott.
Yeah, is that just, look, I'm not exactly sort of awash with a mane of hair. So yes, if you like what we're doing though, go and check out your podcast catcher. Leave a review, 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever you want to do. All feedback is greatly appreciated. Go leave a review. And as Julian said during the show, if you really, really like what we do, and you want to hear more, go check out our Patreon. Patreon.com/20, that's 20CG Media. And we do a weekly podcast on there where we look at the Twilight Zone. We're still working our way through the first season of the Twilight Zone. We're going to go through all of them. Trekking through the Twilight Zone. I do a monthly podcast called 30-Minute Thoughts. And we do all kinds of bits and pieces on there, some behind the scenes. And we've got some other special things coming up in the future. So if you want to know more, go check out the Patreon. There's a link below in the notes. Other than that, we've got some great, exciting things coming. As I say, we're going to make some announcements soon. But Julian, thank you very much for talking Gattaca with us.
Well, thanks for making me watch this. I always enjoy our discussions and I always learn from them. And I know that if listeners get, half as much out of it as I do, they're doing great. And I hope people appreciate the deep dives and, enjoy the show and tell their friends.
That's it. Yeah, spread the word, guys. Spread the word, because these aren't just reviews. We're not just reviews. We are literally just. We really want to get a discussion going. So I hope you enjoy those discussions. But anyway, we're going to have some interesting discussions coming up. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us, and we shall see you in the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.